Thank you very much, my dear colleagues. Thank you very much, Majority Floor Leader, Mr. President. Mr. President, before I begin my sponsorship, I want us all to take a moment to recognize all our key agencies that are in the chamber today in support of this measure. We have in the Office of the President represented by Executive Secretary Lucas Bersamin, who's with us. SAP, Special Assistant to the President, Anton Lagdameo. We have with us USEC Roy Cervantes, as well as the DTI Secretary led by Secretary Alfred Pascual, USEC Seferino Rodolfo, and our Chief Negotiator, ASEC Alan Jepti. Trade Negotiator, rather. The Department of Finance by Secretary Benjamin Joknos, the Department of Labor and Employment, Secretary Benvenido Laguesma, and USEC Felipe Egargo. The Department of Agriculture by USEC Agnes Miranda, and he's arriving very soon, USEC Domingo Panganiban. ASEC Arnel de Mesa, ASEC Noel Padre, and ASEC Res Estoperes. The Department of Foreign Affairs by USEC Jesus Domingo, USEC Antonio Morales, USEC Edgardo de Vega, and ASEC Bernie Candolada. Bureau of Customs, Commissioner Buenvenido Rubio and Assistant Commissioner Vincent Philip Maronilla. The Tariff Commission by Commissioner Marisa Paderon. The DTI Bureau of Investments, Executive Director Corazon Dichosa, and NEDA, National Economic Development Authority, USEC Edilion. And of course, our PLLO Secretary, Dong Mendoza. Mga kababayan, mga kapatid ko dito sa Senado, buong-buo po ang suporta ng ating gobyerno sa Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement. Full House, full support. Of course, matagal na pong suportado ng gobyerno ang RCEP. At concurrence na lang ng Senado ang hinihintay po nito. This is precisely why I stand here today, Mr. President, to present the RCEP agreement for approval and concurrence of the Senate. Una na po itong sumalang sa Senado noong 18th Congress by our dear Minority Floor Leader who ably handled all the hearings and the debates on the floor, Senator Coco Pimentel. Nandito bumuli tayo, and I believe that with the benefits of time, and more importantly, additional consultations with concerned sectors, we have a good opportunity to evaluate RCEP ngayon. Magandang balikan natin ang RCEP ngayon, especially since we can now observe how well our fellow RCEP signatories have been faring since all greenlit the implementation of agreements in their countries. Mr. President, ayoko pong mapag-iwanan tayo. Ayoko pong tignan tayo ng ibang bansa bilang isang isolationist o isang North Korea dito sa region na sarado sa malayang kalakaran. Ayoko pong pigilan ang paglago ng ating industriya at pag-unlad ng ating mamamayan. But it should be wrong to simply argue that we must join it because others did. We must not simplify or simply be swept by the bandwagon. Rather, we should join out of the belief that it will create a snowball effect on jobs for our people and markets for our produce. So, Mr. President, my dear colleagues, I truly feel it is imperative that we consider the agreement anew. And what best way to go about this by stripping RCEP back down to the basics so we can try to understand what it can really do for our country. The RCEP agreement, Mr. President, my dear colleagues, is the largest regional free trade agreement in the world, a critical policy tool to strengthen our participation in the global economy. At its core, the agreement is really about establishing clear, stable, predictable rules in doing trade and investments in the region, so it will be more convenient and competitive for our businesses and investors to be integrated in the global economy. That is why in RCEP, we have chapters and provisions covering trade and goods, rules of origin, customs procedures, trade facilitations, sanitary, phytosanitary measures, standards and technical regulations, conformity procedures, trade remedies, services, investments, intellectual property, e-commerce, competition, small and medium enterprises, economic and technical cooperation, dispute settlements, among others. Kaya nga, comprehensive agreement talaga ito. In other words, RCEP agreement covers almost all aspects of the economy. Hindi lang po ito tungkol sa reduction or elimination ng tariff rates o pagbubukas ng merkado sa importasyon, talagang all-encompassing po ang coverage ng RCEP. Thus, as we examine this agreement, we have to appreciate it in its broader context. Let me emphasize, my dear colleagues, as a premise that in a globalized economy, the Philippines cannot afford to isolate itself from the rest of the world or even send a signal to that effect. As a policy, we want to attract more investments. That is why we recently passed, through our colleagues here in the Senate, the Foreign Investments Act, the Public Services Act, the Retail Trade Liberalization Act. We need to provide incentives. So we passed the CREATE law so that investors would come to the Philippines, do business, generate jobs, and eventually fuel our economy. Today, production of goods and services have already been revolutionized by international trade. Goods and services are no longer either made in the Philippines or made in China, in that one wins when it produced products that are exported to another country, or loses when it imports products into their country. In a global economy, products are put together in one country from many components sourced in other countries and then sold all over the world. As a result, vastly fewer products are solely made by any one country. Tingnan niyo yung mapa po. Yan yung ating trade agreement, RCEP. Let me say this. This is what RCEP is all about. And if you look at the slide, it provides a stable platform for countries in this region, and they can optimize participation in the global economy and the global value chain. Yung nakikita po niyan, mga kababayan, that is 30% of the global economy. That is 30% of our population, and that is of the global population, and that is 30% of GDP of the world. Thus, when the Philippines signed onto this agreement, almost all business organizations, industry associations, foreign chambers manifested strong support to the country's immediate ratification. To name a few, we have the support of the Philippine Chamber of Commerce and Industry, the largest business organization in the country, the Australia-New Zealand Chamber, Filipino Banana Growers and Exporters Association, Confederation of Wearable Exporters in the Philippines, Canned Sardines Association of the Philippines, Federation of Philippine Industries, Garment Business Association of the Philippines, IT and Business Process Association of the Philippines, Japanese Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Joint Foreign Chambers, a coalition of American Chambers of Commerce in the Philippines, Australia-New Zealand Chamber, Canadian Chamber, European Chamber of Commerce in the Philippines, Korean Chamber, and PAMURI, Philippine Association of Multinational Companies Regional Headquarters Incorporated, and the Philippine Exporters Confederation. Even international bodies and organizations such as the Asian Development Bank, World Bank, the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development have recognized the value and importance of RCEP, especially in our post-pandemic recovery. Sadly, to date, the Philippines, and let me repeat, the Philippines is the only RCEP signatory state that has not yet ratified the RCEP agreement. And businesses and foreign investors are already getting wary with the consistency of our trade and investment policy directions. Siguro naman, mga kapatid ko dito sa Senado, hindi naman siguro tayo pinakamagaling sa kanila lahat. Ito po yung mga bansa na katulad ng ating mga kababayan sa region na Asia, ASEAN, plus Japan, South Korea, New Zealand, Australia, and China. So, my dear friends, let me give you a little background. The RCEP took effect in January 1, 2022. I want to show you, my dear friends, that after a quick review and progress of its implementation over a year sa ASEAN, that our friends in ASEAN are already reaping the benefits of this RCEP agreement. And don't take it from me, baka sabihin nyo si Migz, bolero yan. O baka yung DTI, bolero yan. Ipapakita po namin sa inyo sa screen. Ha? Kaya nga, sabi ko, mas maganda, sabi ko sa ating mga DTI, ipakita natin ang nailalabas sa ibang bansa. For example, Vietnam's exports to RCEP countries reached 100.48 billion US dollars. Let me repeat, for 2022, they increased by $108.48 billion in 2022, up 16% from the previous year. Many of these gains are from exports of agricultural products. Seafood exports for Vietnam, particularly, increased by 34% in the first few months of 2022 upon joining and ratifying the RCEP, with RCEP countries accounting for 64% of total export. Fruit and vegetable exports to China, papuntang China po ito, surged 30,000 tons in December last year. Among these fruits and vegetable products was durian. And in just 1 month, Vietnam earned nearly $50 million from exporting durian to China. This is one product where the Philippines should have a competitive advantage. Kami ni Senator Bato, ako, Senator Bongo, si Senator Coco Pimentel na taga Mindanao, durian ang napakarami sa amin, and we can export this immediately to China. With this, in this one product where the Philippines should have a competitive advantage, which is not being utilized as we continue to withhold participation of RCEP. It is Cambodia, Thailand, and Vietnam that's sending durian from to these countries. And mas masarap po yung durian namin, with due respect. Also, Thailand and Cambodia likewise reported gains in total trade with RCEP countries of 7.1% and 4% respectively. Thailand and Cambodia. Thailand's exports to RCEP countries totaled $140 billion US dollars in 2022. As for Cambodia, its garments industry, yung paggagawa po ng mga damit for export, has been making money since the entry into force of RCEP. In total, its garments industry earned $10.25 billion from exports in the first 3 quarters of 2022. This represents a 24% year-on-year growth. 24% increase, mga kababayan ko, mga kapatid ko. This is an industry where the Philippines hopes to regain a comparative advantage to RCEP. Di ba magaling po tayo dyan? We used to have a thriving garments export. Meanwhile, Malaysia is forecasting a 9.3% growth in exports in 2023, with RCEP's full entry into force being one of the factors. Definitely, mga kapatid, this development is a clear indication of RCEP's positive effects. We cannot afford to be a fence-sitter while witnessing other ASEAN member states reaping the benefits of this agreement. Not only will we be put to advantage, but we will also be missing out on a lot of opportunities. Let me show you some advantages of RCEP that we are missing out as we further delay our participation. Una, mga kapatid, the fact that it's the largest free trade area in the world, composed of 15 parties, is in itself an advantage. Tingnan po yun yung mapa. Imagine, you can source raw materials and intermediate goods from these 15 countries, process the products in the Philippines, and export these products back to RCEP. Sana makuha po ninyo lahat. Kung meron po tayong pabrika sa Pilipinas, at gusto po tayong gumawa ng isang produkto dito, pero ang raw materials ay kukunin po natin sa RCEP countries. Zero tariff po yan pagpasok dito sa atin, at paglabas din at papasok sa kanila ng finished product, zero tariff. While it is true, my dear friends, because this is an argument of some of my dear colleagues, while this is true that we have already existing FTAs, the benefit of a wider cumulation cannot be enjoyed in these FTAs. For example, FTA's free trade agreement. As an example, in RCEP, Philippine garments manufacturers will be able to source fabrics from China or anywhere in the world, export it back to Japan at a preferential tariff. This is not previously possible. Because under the rules of origin, mga kapatid, under the ASEAN-Japan Comprehensive Economic Partnership or RCEP, ito po yung ASEAN-Japan Economic Partnership. Yan yung ating FTA with Japan. And the Philippine-Japan Economic Partnership Agreement and JPEPA. It restricts Philippine exports to sourcing fabrics only from Japan or ASEAN countries. Kaya kung gusto po natin mag-export para sa Uniqlo, di po tayo pwedeng gawin yun unless we get our fabrics from Japan under the existing agreement. These strict rules is not reflective of all sourcing patterns and requirements of Philippine garment manufacturers. Also under RCEP, the Philippines was able to secure zero tariff rates for garments compared to 5% tariff rate under existing ASEAN-Korea Free Trade Agreement. Right now po, 5% ang garments natin pag pinasok natin sa Korea. But under this RCEP, zero tariff na po. We can send our garments to Korea at zero tariff. Thus, if the country continues not to be party to the RCEP agreement, makinig po tayo lahat. Garments manufacturers in Cambodia, in Laos, in Malaysia, Indonesia, and other ASEAN member states will have a comparative advantage against our own garments manufacturers. Lugi po tayo. Hindi po natin maibebenta na mas mura. RCEP also works in favor of our fishing canning factories as they can globally source fish and export them to RCEP regions. Currently, some Philippine tuna canneries source the raw material from non-RCEP parties. Marami po tayong kaibigan na may fishing industry. They get their fish now from Papua New Guinea or Norway. Under the FTA with Japan, they are unable to get preferential tariff because of their sourcing pattern. So their exports pay high duty imports. With RCEP, their exports to Japan will now qualify for preferential tariffs. So these are from the provinces of General Santos, Zamboanga City, Palawan, yung mga high fish producing areas natin. Magkakaroon na sila ng advantage with this. Our farmers and producers of papaya and durian, as I mentioned earlier, will also benefit because they can now export these products to South Korea at a preferential arrangement. That is from 24%. Yan yung ASEAN-Korea Free Trade Agreement, 24% to 0% in 10 years under RCEP. So imagine kung hindi tayo sasama dito, edi 24% taon-taon ang babayaran nating taripa para sa ating mga prutas na papasok po sa Korea na hindi nila pwedeng gawin at katulad ng papaya at durian, they cannot produce it in Korea. So at least we have a chance that within 10 years, 0% ang taripa. Same also with our farmers and producers of coffee because they can now export these products to Japan at a preferential arrangement that is from 10 to 12% in the ASEAN-Japan Economic Partnership to 0%. Pababa po yan. That's cumulative. Pababa ng 1%, 2%, 3% in 16 years under RCEP. Eh yun po, sa Davao, masarap ang kape. They have coffee beans in Davao, Bukidnon, Cordilleras, San Pabao, Cavite, katabi ko, as a very good coffee production industry, including Batangas. So, my friends, another advantage is the manufacturers of mixtures of preserved fruits. Ito po, fruit cocktail, fruit juices, yung mga pomelo juice, ano pa, carrot juice, yung mga mango juice, will enjoy an improved concession in Japan that is from 5% to 9%, now existing, 5% to 9%, to 0% in 2016 under RCEP. Eh kung hindi tayo mag-RCEP po, ay lahat na, Thailand na lang sila bibili. Lahat na, wala na po tayong chance na makapasok doon. Kasi mahal po ang ating produkto. Napakasimple lang po. Ito nga, yung fruit cocktail. Right now, fruit cocktail, and you know, Cagayan de Oro, where Del Monte plant is, General Santos is where they produce fruit cocktail for our fruit salad. 5% to 29% po ang taxation nito na yun under the ASEAN-Japan Comprehensive Economic Partnership. If we join RCEP, 0% in 16 years. Wala na po tayong babayaran ng taripa. Imagine, pwede na tayo maging retire as farmers. I will retire as a farmer. I hope I can plant this papaya and make fruit cocktails and send it to Japan one day. Even our beverage companies can now export alcoholic beverages, beer, gin, rum, to South Korea at a preferential arrangement. That is from 15% sa existing ASEAN-Korean Free Trade Agreement, it's 15% tax to 0% in 15 years under RCEP. Can you imagine? 0%. So lahat po, pati yung Don Papa, lahat pwede nang ipasok dun. 0%. These are just examples of Philippine key products of interest that were able to gain improved markets in the RCEP and will likely be disadvantaged if the Philippines stays out of RCEP. Klaro po, pinapakita ko lang ang mga concrete examples para po ma-digest natin lahat. On trade rules, RCEP also provided simplified and convenient rules of conducting trade in the region, from flexible certification procedures, advanced rulings for tarification, valuation, and rules of origin, and time-bound consultations and resolution of issues relating to trade measures, among others. Ibig po sabihin, simple na po. Kasi kung hindi po tayo sasali dyan at doon lang tayo sa existing free trade agreements natin, iba-iba po ang free trade agreement sa Japan. Iba po ang sa China, ASEAN-China. Iba po ang sa Korea. Kung sa ease of doing business pa, malilito po kayo. Kung magdadala po kayo sa iba't ibang bansa, litong-lito na po kayo sa iba't ibang rules of conducting trade. Kaya simplified na po ito. In the process, businesses will be able to take advantage of the enhanced preferential access to RCEP parties and strengthen their capacity to participate in global value chains. This will be beneficial to MSMEs because this agreement provides a platform called the RCEP SME chapter and institutionalizes support and cooperation for them to be integrated in the regional global product chain and a bigger market. I'd like to put this on record, my dear friends. RCEP is the only free first agreement of ASEAN with a dedicated chapter on SMEs. First and only. Yung mga ibang charters natin with ASEAN, wala po tayong dedicated sa small and medium enterprises. This is it. Give you an example. Yung sinabi ko kanina, nag-usap kami, potato corner now. We'll have an easier chance to go all over ASEAN, maybe even China, because of these simplified rules. Sabi ko nga, sa amin sa Camiguin, because I love the island province of Camiguin, I don't know kung nakabisita po kayo dyan, sa Cagayan de Oro, they have these pastels, yung parang pandesal na may caramel sa loob, na napakasarap na pastel. They produce that in Camiguin. Now, with these simplified rules, ease of doing business, makabenta na sila sa Indonesia. They can sell in Malaysia without having any difficulty with these simplified cross-border rules. RCEP will also push for a legal framework that is favorable for e-commerce, especially during a time when cross-border activities increasingly shifted online. What are the positive results as a consequence of RCEP, my dear friends? As economic activity increases, consequence po ito hindi po ito para sa exporters, hindi po ito para sa importers. Ano pa mga negosyo na makikinabang sa RCEP, mga kababayan? Because of these consequences, more factories will be put up, goods and services will be transacted, have to be mobilized. Kaya, lalakas po ang complementary sectors such as transportation, trucking, di ba po, ng mga gamit, logistics, warehousing, cold storage, pati energy production, even infrastructure will flourish, not to mention attract more investments. Kaya nandito po si Secretary Laguesma of the DOLE because he knows, dadami po ang trabaho natin pag tayo sumama dito. Jobs, 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 ika nga. Sa paglago ng ating kalakalan sa RCEP region, asahan natin ang ripple effect sa iba't ibang sektor. Halimbawa, sa pagpasok ng foreign investments, hihilahin nito pataas ang ating construction industry. Sa paglakas naman ng ating exports, kasama nitong palalakasin ang transport sector na kakailanganin natin sa paghatid ng ating mga produkto. At syempre, sa paglago ng iba't ibang manufacturing industries katulad ng garments, tech parts, canned goods, tataas rin ang demand on related industries katulad ng packaging. Iyan naman ang pangako ng RCEP. Mas maunlad na kalakalan, mas maraming trabaho at mas murang bilihin. Let us now focus on the problems of agriculture. Kasi ito po, dito po tayo nakabinbin at lahat ng sektor ay syempre concerned, particularly on agri. Of course, with all these benefits, we understand the issues and concerns of some groups of farmers who are opposed to the ratification of the RCEP agreement. Ako po, alam naman po ninyo, tumayo na ako dito ilang beses, dinidepensahan ko po ang ating mga magsasaka. I stood up many times against importations. I stood up many times against smuggling. I stood up many times for different industries, particularly the sugar sector. Bilang isang agrikulturista, by education and by profession, naiintindihan ko po ang mga pangamba ng ating mga magsasaka. Alam nyo naman po kung paano ko paglaban ang ating mga magsasaka dito sa loob ng Senado. Kaya gusto ko pong tiyakin sa sektor na hindi tatapakan ng RCEP ang ating mga magsasaka at hindi nito papatayin ang ating agrikultura. Hindi ko rin naman po ito isusulong kung hindi benepisyo ang nakikita ko at dala natin dito. At ako ang unang haharang nito kung makakasama ito para sa atin. In the public hearings, and this is very important, my dear colleagues, it was confirmed that highly sensitive agriculture products such as rice, swine meat, poultry meat, potatoes, onions, garlic, cabbage, sugar, carrots are exempted, excluded. Hindi po sila kasama dito. Itong mga produkto pinapakita ko sa inyo na araw-araw sinisigawan ng ating mga kritiko. Hindi po ito kasali sa RCEP. Mga kababayan na nakikinig po sa atin on live Facebook. In fact, for the record, in RCEP, the Philippines merely gave additional preferential agreements to 33 agricultural tariff lines, specifically for Australia, New Zealand, China, Korea, compared to the existing ASEAN +1 FTAs. This is only equivalent to 1.9% of the total agricultural tariff lines. Ito, napakaganda po nito. Iba yung tariff lines sa produkto, mga kapatid. 33 agricultural tariff lines, 17 tariff lines are for raw materials, 8 tariff lines are for inputs, and only 8 tariff lines are for final goods. Itong 33 tariff lines is only equivalent to 15 agricultural products. Mga kapatid, it's only 15 agricultural products, many of which we don't even produce. Babasahin ko. Fish fillet, frozen mackerel, celery, sausages, olives. Wala po tayong olives kasi Mediterranean country lang yan. Ayaw ng ulan. Pag umulan, patay ang olive tree. Spinach. Maliit lang ang spinach. Konti lang ang spinach natin sa bansa. Olive oil, wala po tayong olive oil. Black pepper, we have a thriving black pepper industry, but if you can see, it only affects Republic of Korea, 5%, and in year 15, 0%. So, napaka-gradual ng bagsak. 15 years pa bago mag 0%. Itong live chicken at live swine, sasabihin ng mga pilosopo, ay, merong live chicken, may live swine. Alam mo mga kababayan, magpadala ka ng live swine dito, galing China, 1 linggo, 10 araw ang biyahe sa barko, patay na yun. Unless may tao na papakain dun sa barko. Diba? Masyado naman mahal kung ililipad mo sila. Live chicken, ganun din. Lalo na yun. Sigurado, pag dinala mo yan sa ibang bansa dito sa barko, halos kalahati na mortality niyan. Patay na yan. It doesn't make any sense. They lose half their weight. Right? So, it's obvious you, our chicken and poultry producers and our swine producers are protected. If you ask me, itong live swine and live chicken was for our ASEAN neighbors that are contiguous to one another. Wala, hindi po sila archipelago. Ano po yan? Cambodia with Myanmar, China with all these Indo-China countries like Vietnam. Kaya siguro linagay nila yun. Preserved onions. Mga babae, nandiyan, preserved onions. Cornstarch. Yung cornstarch nga, 1% lang bagsak. In year 20 pa, 1% lang. Ito'y nakakatawa. Wala naman pong feeds kasi may lumapit sa akin. Yung feeds, mura sa ibang bansa. Papasok dito. Paano naman kami? It is feeds for primates. Hindi po feeds for livestock. Pagkain ng unggoy. It is for feeds for primates. Ha? pagkain ng ungguyan. Yan lang ang natanggalan ng tariff rate. Okay. Napaka-insignificant po ng trade natin sa mga produktong ito. Kaya, ikumpara mo sa benepisyo na makukuha natin sa RCEP, walang duda na mas lamang po ang arrangement na nakuha natin. With respect to the availability of trade remedies, WTO, World Trade Organization remedies, as raised by the group of farmers, Article 7.9 of the RCEP agreement is clear on the matter. To quote, "Nothing in this agreement shall affect the rights and obligations of the parties under Article 19 of the General Agreement on Tariff and Trade, 1994, and the Safeguard Agreement." Sa madaling salita, andyan pa rin po ang WTO safeguards. Hindi mawawala yung WTO safeguards. The transitional RCEP safeguard measure under Article 7.2 referred by the oppositors is just an additional trade remedy available to RCEP parties. What is only prohibited is the imposition of both transitional RCEP safeguard measures and WTO safeguard measures on same goods at the same time. Equally important po ito, mga kababayan. Adequate flexibilities or safe nets are provided in the agreement to cover unwarranted or exceptional circumstances that may occur in the future, including measures related to security, health, and emergency situation. Ano po ito? Tinanong ko po ang ating trade negotiator. Pwede pa rin pala po tayo pumasa ng legislation. We can pass legislation, including rules and regulations of the departments that can restrict imports on the premise of public safety, public health, and emergency situations. So our hands are not tied. If we feel nalulugi isang sektor, we can pass legislation or pass regulation. It will not be violative of the agreement. To further allay the fears of the agriculture sector, we also come up with a set of guidelines. Ito, maganda po ito. Ito pong recommendation ng aking kapatid, ate, Tita Ganda, Lauren Legarda, our Senate President pro tempore, during the hearing of the RCEP, that we will add further protective measures and capacity building programs for the sector, thereby ensuring that they can take full advantage and opportunities afforded to us by the agreement. And I thank Senator Lauren Legarda for not sleeping last night to make sure that these guidelines and instructions are in place. Under these guidelines, two-pronged po ang atake natin para gawing competitive ang agri-sector against importation. Patitibayin natin ang border and quarantine controls. Yan ang utos natin dito sa ating guidelines. Contra smuggling. And I just like to put on record, the President just appointed a new Bureau of Customs Chief because he really is hell-bent in catching smuggling, in this agricultural smuggling. We will also modernize and empower our own sector. To the second point, we will strengthen various developmental programs of the Department of Agriculture, such as the National Rice Program, National Corn Program, National High Value Crops Development Program, National Livestock Program, National Organic Agriculture Program, National Fisheries Program, Agricultural Machinery and Equipment Facilities Infrastructure Program under the Agriculture Modernization Plan. Kasama rin sa guidelines ang access ng ating mga magsasaka, nararapat na credit, insurance, loans, and grants. We also have trade promotions, productivity, and profitability competitiveness programs, such as the Science and Technology Innovation-Driven Industrialization Strategy, the Shared Service Facilities, the Philippine Export Competitiveness Program, the Consultancy for Agriculture Productivity Enhancement Program, among others. These are from my favorite agency, the Department of Trade and Industry. We also have made space for good governance measures to foster trust, transparency, and accountability. Dito, palalakasin natin ang feedback mechanism at sisiguruhin namin na may genuine representation and participation ng lahat ng ating mga stakeholders, including Afghan reform beneficiaries, indigenous communities, at sa ating mga boards, councils, at committees. Kasama natin ang sektor sa policy and program development, including budget preparation and allocation. Under the guidelines that we prepared, we are also pushing for job generation, human capital development programs, to ensure competitiveness of the Filipino workforce, including continuous capacity building, reskilling, upskilling, cross-skilling of workers to adapt to technological development and evolving business models and industries. And I thank Sec. Laguesma for being here and supporting this. Towards environmental protection, we will ensure the effective enforcement of environmental laws, rules and regulations, and the adherence to multilateral environmental agreements in the conduct of trade against investment and the implementation of stringent measures against industrial waste, hazards, and illicit activities. We will also push for the effective use of trade remedies to address unfair trade practices or sudden surge of imports that threaten to adversely affect our concerned local industries. For this purpose, my dear colleagues, I seek your permission, I seek your support that we create a Senate Special Oversight Committee on the RCEP agreement to monitor the policy and programs of concerned agencies and departments, and if necessary, come up with legislative proposals to pursue structural reforms and address implementation gaps. We will also have an advisory group of stakeholders to guide the committee on its functions, particularly our agri stakeholders. Kasama po sila as our consultative body. My dear honorable colleagues, we've already spent enough time debating and evaluating the pros and cons of the RCEP agreement. What is clear that the RCEP agreement is just a policy tool we have to use. The most important question to us really is how, my dear colleagues, how do we utilize this agreement and seize the opportunity that it offers? Ito na po ang trabaho natin sa gobyerno. Our task is to ensure that our stakeholders make use of this potent agreement, that necessary interventions can be done to capacitate and empower our stakeholders, particularly our MSMEs, farmers, fisherfolk, professionals, and workers, for them to be competitive in the global industry. The fruits of RCEP will yield is not proverbial guava that will fall into our open mouths. We will have to work for it, my dear friends, and we will have to sweat for it. I'm making it clear because RCEP should not be oversold to our people as a magic cure and overpromised as our economic salvation. What it is, my dear colleagues, is an opportunity and a bridge towards better connected economic region where the Philippines can establish itself as a major economic force. We have the resources to do so, and most especially hard work and innovation of our people, and I truly believe in our people to lead the way. With RCEP, we may finally have a tool to push us to the very top. Not joining the biggest free trade deal in the world will make us the biggest losers. To be left out of RCEP is to be left behind in a region where economies use free and fair trade to propel their growth. But let us not ratify this pact out of fear, but out of the goodness it could bring. These provisions in this agreement are not barriers to our development, but a bridge to progress. Not walls that will block our growth, but a ladder to climb out of the economic situation the pandemic has created. As of today, we are the odd man out of RCEP, the last man standing out in the cold, not because we are not invited, but because of our inaction. Kaya, mga kapatid kong senador, umaksyon na po tayo. Huwag na tayong matakot sa RCEP. Let us accept RCEP. Mabuhay po tayong lahat. Maraming salamat po.